third lesson now about genre. And so genre makes meaning possible. And so I just want to talk about why we should hit the brakes for genre, because there are some misconceptions about genre, and why some people say, we should just ignore it. So some people would say that the genres of the Bible can just be ignored because they're archaic and irrelevant. And so what we're saying there actually is that we supply the genre. We get to decide what that is. So it's a fairly arrogant statement on this. When we do that, we make the Bible into nothing more than a self-help book. And so when we do this, we miss what the Bible is all about. And we think that life is all about our happiness and fulfillment. And so I'm looking to consume everything that exists to fulfill me and meet my needs. And so we need to realize that they're not archaic, they're not irrelevant. And I'll make the point why in a little bit. But it says the other thing, point 2, is that various genres of the Bible, we should say, some people say, they should be flattened out because common folks can't understand them. Basically, they're saying you're too dumb to understand a genre when you read it. The reality is, though, if I pick up a copy of Harry Potter, I understand that that is different from a letter that my wife wrote me. I understand that they're different things happening here, and I will read them differently. Harry Potter I will read in multiple sittings over time, whereas a letter my wife wrote me, I'm probably going to read all at one time. So it's just different the way we approach things based on genre. Again, we'll get to that. And so in this, I just want to think about some books and movies that we would clearly identify as genres, and that we actually know more about these genres than we do biblical genres. And so just look at this. This is a picture of the Avengers, right? The Avengers, and we know what kind of genre this is. That's action. We understand that. We go into it expecting things to blow up. Now, if it was a calm movie and two, lovers look at each other in the eyes and they're lost and so hopelessly in love with each other, that would not be the Avengers. And we would not be expecting that. We would walk away going, this was terrible, right? Because of our expectations. Now, this next one, The Notebook, right? It's a romantic movie. It's a love story. We're not expecting something to blow up. Now, guys, if we get drugged to this movie with our wife and something does blow up, we're really excited. Why? Because we didn't expect for it to happen. Genre gives us meaning. Genre makes communication possible here. Another one, Silence of the Lambs, probably a thriller or maybe a horror, right? This thriller on the edge of your seat. We're expecting something in this. And so we go into it expecting maybe to be a little scared and wondering what's around the corner, which is then The Exorcist, right? The Exorcist rocked people's world when it first came out in the movie theaters. And so in this, it changes the way you look at everything. And you're scared, the bump in the night, what was that? What is that? And it'll affect our dreams. We understand that. Another one, The Office. We understand that The Office is this mockumentary. It's supposed to be like this documentary. It takes place in an office, but it's a comedy. And the things are extremely exaggerated and blown out of proportion, yet we expect it to be funny. And in fact, when things we expect to be funny aren't, we say, it wasn't really funny, I didn't like it. Because, again, genre gives us meaning. Another objection against genre is somebody would say, because every word of the Bible is inspired by God, the individual words should be our main emphasis, not the large units of the text, such as genre. Well, I'd say that this is actually an excuse to focus on a word or a phrase, and it's used for a springboard for what they want it to say, not what actually the Holy Spirit wants it to say. And so the genre should bring safeguards in so we can't change the meaning of this public shareable thing. That a letter, the gospel, a prophecy, a poem, all this was written in a public shareable format. And when you change it and go against the way the original author intended, inspired by the Holy Spirit, when you change that meaning just by focusing on a single word, and taking it and ripping it from its context, you are actually doing an incredible disservice to the scriptures. And you're doing an incredible disservice to your own learning and the people you're trying to teach as well. But meaning comes from the top down. the large parts to the smaller parts. And so anytime you're reading through it and you go, well, what does that mean? I don't understand. Does this mean that? You want to step back and say, okay, again, who, what, where, when, why, how, what's going on here? To give yourself some of these answers that you're looking for. The fourth thing that people would say, hey, get rid of genre, is that genres of the Bible are too hard, and therefore just the playground of scholars only, smart people basically only. There are a small number of genres that are harder than others. Prophecy, parables, poetics, Ecclesiastes, right? Speculative wisdom, parts of Daniel, incredibly hard. Ezekiel, this apocalyptic literature, Ezekiel like Revelation, very hard to understand and get it right. And so that's where there's a lot of different interpretations of what's going on there. But mainly when we're talking about gospel narratives, narratives in general, letters, and we'll get into what those are. And even I'd love to do some videos in the future about how to navigate those genres as you're reading them. The vast majority are easy to understand. And a historical narrative, we know how to read that. That's the Gospels. We know how to read that. That is Acts and historical narrative. This isn't rocket surgery, okay? A genre makes it easier in shareable forms. So this shareable public thing that the text is, it now makes it easier to share, because if I understand that genre and you understand that genre, then as we read, we're going to come to hopefully a lot of the same conclusions. Why? Inspired by the Holy Spirit. To do that the Holy Spirit will cause an impact based on what the main idea of the passage, as we are true to the genre of it. There's some debate on how many genres are represented in the Bible. Let me just give you 10 examples here. So we have an Old Testament narrative, law, Psalms, wisdom, prophecy, Gospels, parables, those are contained within the Gospels, Acts, epistles, and Revelation, or apocalyptic literature. Like I said before, Ezekiel and parts of Daniel fall into that, okay? And it's really kind of beyond the scope of this to really discuss each genre. Like I said, I want to get into that in the future. And I just want to get you aware that they exist and they affect how we read them, okay? So if you remember the very first video, that context is king. If we think about that, we're going to want to look at something. So let's just look specifically now at Proverbs. So Proverbs 22, one chapter. So Proverbs is wisdom. It's wisdom literature. Proverbs 22:6 says, and I'm reading from the New International Version, the NIV, it says, "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." And now this can be a really hard lesson, because the reality is that we need to identify the genre. It's going to be a hard lesson if we don't identify the genre, because there are plenty of parents who have the wayward son or daughter who's not walking with God, even though I brought them to church every single Sunday for their entire, first 18 years, and now they're not walking with the Lord, and I don't understand why. So again, a proverb is different, wisdom is different than a promise. And when we understand that, to read it differently, it's going to change our expectations on this. And so with this text, we need to remember where meaning comes from. The meaning, again, comes from the top down. The whole gives meaning to the parts. Okay? So we need to read more than just one verse. It's not easy. It's not enough to just read for Proverbs 22:6. You need to read at least the whole chapter. Identify the biblical genre. All right? From what you know, what genre is this? It's a wisdom saying. This passage sits within the larger context of verse 1 through 16. The chapter is bracketed by a discussion of riches, wealth, poverty, and the way to ruin. So verses 1 through 5 discuss the idea that God is the maker of both the rich and the poor. So one should honor God with all that they do, seeking to be prudent, verse 3, humble, verse 4, and that wealth is a reward for these two things. Okay, so this section concludes with the contrast of the rich and the debtor, the rich and the poor. The general idea here is that one should choose to live uprightly in a world seeking to live humbly. If one wants to be prosperous, he will speak graciously of others. Verse 11, he'll be truthful. Verse 12, and not lazy. Verse 13. The final two verses of the section repeat the theme of the proper way to raise a child. So while verse 6 points to the wisdom that if you demonstrate how a child should live, they will look at that as an example when they get older. Verse 15 tells us that one of the ways such training should be carried out, namely, is discipline for foolishness. Okay, so again, it's a parent raising a child. It's a warning against wealth versus debt. If you want to be prosperous, you do these things. If you want to be poor, you do these things. But you probably should raise a child well, discipline their foolishness. Okay? So now, interpret the meaning of the passage. So what is it really talking about? Is it a promise or is it a guideline? Interpret it and then meditate on that. Really think about it. Remember, it's not to get a merit badge at the end of this that you read the Bible. It's for life change, spiritual formation from that. We'll do a lesson on that later. But as you meditate on the passage itself, and about your observations, what is God speaking to you through this? The meaning of the passage is a public thing, but how that applies to your soul is going to be different. And so interpret and meditate, finally apply it. Apply the passage to your life and to those around you. So if we want our children to learn what truly matters in this life, we have to teach them. The writer is saying, if you fail to teach your child what really matters in this life, they'll pursue money and pleasure and end up with nothing. They'll wind up with nothing, and instead train your child to live upright lives, and they will prosper in that. And so I hope that helps as we think about genre. So identify the biblical genre. I gave you 10 to look at. Genre makes meaning possible. They are public. They're accessible. And so I hope that's helpful. I will throw up a tree of interpretation that I made of everything that kind of goes on, so if you can kind of see that and enjoy that. But I hope you guys are doing well. I'm sure there'll be a ton of questions. Hopefully I've been clear. If not, ask questions. Let's keep the dialogue going, and I'll try to clarify the best I can. So hope you guys are doing well, and talk to you later.